What if history had taken a different course? What if, instead of Columbus in 1492, it was a Chinese fleet that first reached the shores of the Americas? How would the world be different today? To answer that, we must first step back into the great currents of history and understand who the Chinese were at the time and how close they came to truly changing the world. The Chinese naval power in the 15th century. In the early 15th century, China was arguably the most advanced civilization on Earth. Under the Ming Dynasty, China was rich, organized, and powerful. At its height, the Ming Navy was unmatched. Led by Admiral Zheng He, a towering Muslim eunuch of great ambition, the Chinese fleet ventured across the Indian Ocean with ships larger and more advanced than anything Europe had at the time. Some of his treasure ships were over 400 feet long, dwarfing Columbus's Santa Maria. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He led 7 massive voyages to Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East, and even the eastern coasts of Africa. These missions were diplomatic, military, and commercial in nature. The Chinese established tribute relationships, spread culture, and demonstrated power, but they never crossed the Pacific Ocean. Why? A missed opportunity. By the mid-15th century, the Ming emperors grew suspicious of exploration. They feared foreign influence and corruption, and they viewed the outside world as inferior. So, the great Chinese fleets were dismantled. The shipyards were shut down, maps and records were destroyed. China turned inward, retreating from its role as a global explorer. At that very moment, Europe was waking up. The Portuguese, the Spanish, and later the Dutch and British began launching expeditions. The age of exploration was born, without China. But what if the Ming court had made a different decision? The alternate timeline begins. Let us now imagine a different history. Suppose that around 1420, Admiral Zheng He, or another Ming naval commander, perhaps driven by curiosity or the winds of fate, turned east instead of west. Suppose that a Chinese fleet, carried by the Pacific currents, reached the coast of what is now California, or perhaps the west coast of Mexico or Peru. What would happen next? First, the Chinese would have encountered indigenous civilizations, the Aztecs, the Maya, or the early Inca. These encounters would have been shaped by diplomacy rather than conquest. Unlike the European colonizers, who arrived hungry for gold and land, the Chinese Empire traditionally sought tribute and respect, not colonization in the European sense. The first Chinese expeditions might have left behind gifts, knowledge, and perhaps even a few settlers. Cultural exchange and technological shift. A Chinese-influenced Americas would look very different. Architecture, philosophy, language, and agriculture could have evolved under Confucian and Taoist principles. The written script of Chinese characters might have been adopted by some native groups. Buddhist or Confucian temples might stand alongside Mesoamerican pyramids. Chinese medicine, printing technology, and civil bureaucracy would have transformed the way indigenous societies operated. Imagine the Aztecs using paper money, or the Inca road systems enhanced by Chinese engineering. This early cross-cultural fusion could have sparked a golden age in the Americas, centuries before Europe even arrived. Europe's delayed entry and a new power balance. Now imagine what happens in the 1490s when Columbus sets sail, only to find that China is already present. The Spanish, upon reaching the Caribbean or Central America, would encounter not isolated tribal societies, but Chinese trading outposts, Confucian schools, and advanced Asian weaponry. Europe might be forced to negotiate, not conquer. The European colonial age would be delayed, reshaped, or even completely blocked by Chinese influence. Perhaps North and South America would remain independent of European rule, developing under Chinese guidance instead. This shift in global power would be enormous. Instead of the Atlantic world dominating history, Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, the Pacific world might take center stage. A Chinese-American alliance, perhaps even a unified trade empire, could stretch from Beijing to Lima. The balance of power in Europe would also change. Without the riches of the Americas, Spain might never rise. The British Empire might never form. The Industrial Revolution could be delayed or occur in China or the Americas instead. Slavery and human rights. One of the darkest chapters of Western colonization was the Atlantic slave trade. But China, unlike Europe, had no tradition of industrial-scale slavery based on race. So if China had discovered America first, the transatlantic slave trade may never have existed. Africa would remain relatively untouched by colonial exploitation for much longer. Millions of lives could have been spared. The global racial hierarchies that emerged from European imperialism might never take root. Instead, a more multi-ethnic, decentralized, and cooperative system of international trade might... Religion and ideology. What about religion? Christianity played a central role in European conquest, but the Chinese worldview was different. Confucianism emphasized harmony, hierarchy, and duty. Taoism respected nature and balance. Buddhism taught detachment and compassion. These philosophies, if introduced early in the Americas, would have reshaped the spiritual foundations of entire continents. Instead of Catholic cathedrals and Christian missions, the New World might be filled with Buddhist monasteries, Confucian academies, and Taoist temples. The religious wars of Europe, the Inquisition, the Crusades, the Reformation, might never spill into the Americas. The modern world in this ultimate reality. Fast forward to the modern era. What would the world look like? Perhaps Mandarin is the global lingua franca, not English. Perhaps major world cities include Beijing, Tenochtitlan, Shanghai, Cusco, Xi'an, and California Bayport. The United Nations could be headquartered in Nanjing, not New York. The global economy might be centered on the Pacific. The dominant global philosophies might revolve around harmony with nature, family loyalty, and collective well-being, rather than individualism and capitalism. Technology might follow a different path. Chinese engineering, astronomy, and printing could have advanced even further with the addition of American resources and ideas. We might have colonized space centuries earlier, or developed green energy instead of fossil fuels. And geopolitics? There might be no Cold War, no world wars, no nuclear arms race. Instead, regional conflicts may exist, but a global balance maintained by a powerful Chinese-American alliance could keep the peace. Could it have really happened? But we must also ask, could this alternate history have truly happened? The truth is, the Chinese were capable. They had the ships, the maps, and the motivation. But internal politics and cultural isolationism stopped them. A single decision by the Ming court to shut down the naval program changed the fate of the world. History is not just a story of what happened, but also of what could have happened. The what-ifs remind us how fragile and how powerful our choices are. Conclusion: the world that might have been. In the end, if China had discovered America first, the world would be radically different. Not necessarily better, not necessarily worse, but different in values, structure, and history. It is a reminder that civilizations rise and fall not just because of war or conquest, but because of decisions. Decisions made by rulers, thinkers, and ordinary people. And perhaps, had the winds blown a little differently, or had one emperor seen the stars with more curiosity, the entire world might have sailed under a different flag.